Ambush in the canyon. The canyon walls, baked red by the afternoon sun, echoed with the sudden crack of rifles. Dust exploded near Chaska's feet as he shoved Ayasha behind a jagged outcrop. Yumas, he grunted, recognizing the war paint even through the swirling grit. 3 riders, lean and fierce, blocked the narrowest part of the canyon ahead, while 2 more flanked them on higher ground. Ayasha notched an arrow, her hands steady despite the chaos. "They've been tracking us for days." Chaska returned fire, his Winchester barking defiance. One of the Yumas on the ridge yelped and tumbled from his horse. A bullet whizzed past Ayasha's ear, kicking up stone fragments. "We run," Chaska decided, grabbing her hand. "Now!" They scrambled back the way they came, the Yuma's war cries echoing behind them. The canyon floor was uneven, a treacherous mix of loose scree and hidden gullies. Another bullet tore through Chaska's sleeve, a hot, stinging trail. He ignored it, pulling Ayasha onward. "Chaska, your arm!" Ayasha cried, seeing the blood blooming on his buckskin shirt. He didn't reply, his face grim. The canyon seemed to stretch endlessly before them. He stumbled, catching himself on a boulder, but the effort cost him. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he leaned heavily on Ayasha. Go on," he rasped, his voice thick with pain. "I'll slow you down." Ayasha refused to leave his side. "We go together," she insisted, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. She helped him to a narrow ledge, partially concealed by a scraggly juniper. They were exposed, but it offered a momentary respite. Chaska's breath came in ragged gasps, his face ashen. The Yumas were closing in, their shadows lengthening in the dying sunlight. A beacon in the desert. Chaska's breath rattled in his chest, each inhale a painful rasp. Sand stung Ayasha's face, whipped by a wind that offered no relief from the baking heat. He stumbled, his grip on her hand tightening reflexively. I can't." Ayasha knelt beside him, her hand cool against his fevered brow. "Rest, Chaska. Just a moment." She scanned the horizon, a shimmering, endless expanse of ochre and gray. Despair threatened to engulf her, but then, a flicker. A tiny pinpoint of light, impossibly distant. "Look," she breathed, pointing. "A light." Chaska squinted, his vision blurring. "A trick of the sun." "No. It's steady." Hope, fragile as a desert bloom, unfurled within her. She helped him to his feet, his weight heavy on her slight frame. "We go there." Each step was agony for Chaska, a testament to his failing strength. The light remained a distant promise, a beacon in their personal hell. Hours bled together under the relentless sun. Finally, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, they saw it clearly, a cluster of buildings, huddled together against the encroaching desert, a ranch. Hesitation gnawed at Ayasha. They were strangers, Apache in a land increasingly hostile to their kind. But Chaska needed help, now. She pulled him forward, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the fading light. A dog barked, a sharp, warning sound that echoed in the stillness. A figure emerged from the main house, silhouetted against the warm glow of lamplight, a rifle held loosely at his side. Their salvation, or their doom? Dusty's promise. Dusty squinted, rifle raised. 2 figures stumbled from the sagebrush, one practically dragging the other. He lowered the weapon a fraction. Indians. A woman, supporting a man who looked half dead. He kept his rifle trained on them, wary. "Help," the woman rasped, her voice thin and desperate. She clutched the man, her dark eyes pleading. Dusty hesitated, then holstered his rifle, his gut twisting. He wasn't a monster. "Come on in," he said gruffly, gesturing towards the ranch house. He watched them approach, his hand never straying far from his holster. Inside, Dusty helped Ayasha lay the man on the cot. Chaska, she called him. He was burning with fever, a dark stain blooming on his side. Ayasha wrung a cloth, her movements frantic. Chaska's eyes flickered open, focusing on Dusty with immense effort. He coughed, a bloody froth flecking his lips. They ambushed us. He gasped for air. Please. Ayasha, he gripped Dusty's hand, his strength surprising. Promise me, protect her. She is all I have. His voice was a bare whisper. Dusty looked at Ayasha, her face etched with fear and love. He looked back at Chaska, at the fading light in his eyes. He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. I promise, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I swear it. Chaska's grip loosened. His eyes closed, a faint smile gracing his lips. Ayasha began to weep, a sound of utter despair. The warriors farewell. Chaska's breath rattled like dry leaves skittering across the parched earth. Ayasha clutched his hand, her knuckles white. The scent of sage and blood hung heavy in the air of the small ranch house. Dusty watched from the corner, the firelight dancing in his eyes, mirroring the turmoil in his gut. Ayasha, Chaska rasped, his voice a mere whisper. The promise, tears streamed down Ayasha's face, blurring the intricate tattoos on her chin. I am here, my heart. I am here. Chaska's gaze flickered to Dusty. Protect her. She is the last ember. A tremor ran through him, then stillness. His hand went slack in Ayasha's. A wail tore from Ayasha's throat, a sound primal and raw, echoing the desolation of the desert. She cradled Chaska's head, rocking back and forth, lost in her grief. Dusty swallowed hard, the weight of his promise settling upon him like a shroud. He hadn't known Chaska for more than a few hours, yet the man had entrusted him with everything. He looked at Ayasha, her face buried in Chaska's chest. The fire crackled, a small sound in the vast silence. He had promised. He would protect her. But from what? From whom? And what did he truly know about this woman, now alone in a world that seemed determined to crush her? The questions swirled, a dust devil in his mind, obscuring the path ahead. Learning new ways. The saddle felt like a foreign beast beneath her. Ayasha gripped the reins until her knuckles burned white, her body stiff with fear. Dusty, patient as the sun-baked earth, guided her. Easy now, girl. Just breathe. She feels your tension. The mare, a gentle sorrel named Lily, shifted beneath her, sensing Ayasha's unease. Days bled into weeks. She learned to coax Lily into a trot, then a canter, the wind whipping her hair across her face, tasting of dust and freedom. The cattle were another challenge. The bellowing, swirling mass of horns and hide intimidated her, a stark contrast to the quiet, watchful deer she hunted in the mountains. Dusty showed her how to herd them, his movements economical and sure, a dance he'd been performing his whole life. She watched, mimicking his posture, the low calls he used to guide them. One evening, while tending a small kitchen garden, Ayasha recognized a familiar plant. Yarrow, she said, pointing to the feathery leaves. Good for wounds, fever. Dusty watched her grind the leaves with a stone, the scent sharp and earthy. He'd always relied on store-bought remedies, distrustful of what he didn't understand. Now, he listened, intrigued, as she described the plant's properties, her voice soft but confident. Their meals were quiet affairs. Dusty would cook simple fare, beans, salted pork, biscuits, and they would eat in the fading light, the vastness of the land a silent witness. Sometimes, she would share stories of her people, their traditions, their reverence for the land. He, in turn, spoke of the ranch, his dreams of building something that would last. The grief remained, a constant shadow, but moments of understanding flickered between them, fragile and new. Whispers of the heart. Winter bit hard, frosting the windows of the ranch house and layering the plains in a thick blanket of white. Ayasha, bundled in furs Dusty had traded for, learned to track cattle through the snow, her breath misting in the frigid air. She wasn't just learning to ride, she was learning to anticipate the herd's movements, reading the subtle shifts in their behavior. Dusty watched her, a quiet pride warming him against the cold. He'd never met anyone who learned so quickly, who possessed such an intuitive understanding of the land. One night, the wind howled a mournful song, keeping them inside. Dusty showed her his father's old star charts, explaining constellations and nebulae. Ayasha, in turn, shared the stories her people told about the night sky, tales of Coyote and the stars, of the Great Bear and the changing seasons. Their voices, low and intimate, filled the small space, chasing away the shadows of their shared grief. Later, huddled by the fire, Ayasha pointed to a faint constellation. "That is the place where souls go to rest, according to my people." Dusty watched the firelight dance in her dark eyes. "I reckon your husband's soul is shining bright up there." A silence fell between them, heavier than the crackling fire. Ayasha looked away, a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher crossing her face. He found himself wanting to reach out, to take her hand, but the memory of his promise, of her husband's last request, held him back. Yet, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the whispers of his heart were growing louder, and that Ayasha, too, could hear them. A new beginning. The morning sickness arrived with the subtlety of a desert wind, a whisper at first, then a howling gale. Ayasha initially dismissed it as the unfamiliar richness of the ranch food, the eggs and bacon a far cry from her usual fare of rabbit and berries. But the persistent nausea, the dizzy spells that struck while she was learning to track cattle, told a different story. A story confirmed by the knowing glint in Mrs. Henderson's eye when Ayasha confessed her discomfort. That evening, under a sky dusted with stars, Dusty was pointing out constellations, his finger tracing patterns only he seemed to see. Ayasha took a deep breath, the cool night air doing little to settle the butterflies in her stomach. "Dusty," she began, her voice barely a murmur, "there is something you should know." She watched his face, the way the starlight caught the crinkles around his eyes. "I am with child." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. Dusty lowered his hand, the star chart forgotten. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, lighting it from within. He reached out, gently placing his hand on her stomach. "A little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The news swept through the ranch like wildfire, bringing with it a sense of renewed purpose. Mrs. Henderson began knitting tiny clothes, her needles clicking a cheerful rhythm. Even the gruff ranch hands seemed lighter, their laughter echoing across the fields as they started building a cradle, carving it from the sturdiest oak. Ayasha watched it all, a bittersweet ache in her heart for the husband she had lost, but also a burgeoning hope for the future, a future where Apache and cowboy blood would mingle, creating something new and strong. Hope's arrival. Ayasha's sharp intake of breath cut through the quiet of the cabin. Dusty, mending a saddle by the fire, nearly sliced his thumb off. He'd been expecting this, preparing for weeks, but the sheer reality of it froze him. "Ayasha?" She gripped the edge of the table, her face pale. "It is time." Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to move, to remember the instructions the midwife had given him weeks ago. He stoked the fire, heated water, and laid out clean cloths. Ayasha, with a strength he both admired and feared, guided him. Hours blurred into a haze of labored breathing, hushed encouragements, and the rhythmic creaking of the bed. Then, a cry. Small, but piercing. Dusty stared, dumbfounded, as Ayasha held a tiny, wrinkled bundle. A girl. He hadn't dared to dream of a daughter. He knelt beside the bed, tears stinging his eyes. Ayasha smiled, a weary but radiant smile. "Hope," she whispered, offering the baby to him. He cradled her, his large hand surprisingly gentle. Hope. It was perfect. A fragile promise in a harsh world. He looked at Ayasha, his heart overflowing. This was their new beginning. News spread quickly across the ranch. The hands, initially hesitant around Ayasha, celebrated with a fervor Dusty hadn't anticipated. They strung lanterns across the porch, uncorked a bottle of whiskey which Dusty promptly confiscated for himself and Ayasha, and sang old cowboy songs, their voices rough but full of joy. Under the vast, starlit sky, Hope slept soundly, oblivious to the love and protection that surrounded her. A blended heritage. Ayasha's low moans echoed through the cabin as Dusty knelt beside her, his calloused hand gripping hers. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her forehead. Almost there, Ayasha, he murmured, his voice a soothing rumble against the storm within her. Hours later, a cry pierced the air, sharp and insistent. Hope. The ranch became Hope's classroom. Ayasha, her strength returning, taught her the intricate beadwork of her people, the stories woven into each design. Hope's small fingers, clumsy at first, gradually mastered the art, creating vibrant patterns that reflected the desert landscape and the spirits that dwelled within it. Evenings were filled with Ayasha's tales of coyote and grandmother spider, whispers in the firelight that painted vivid images in Hope's young mind. Dusty, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he watched them, shared his own heritage. Before Hope could walk, she sat astride his gentle mare, her tiny hands gripping the saddle horn. As she grew, he taught her to rope, the lasso a spinning dance in the air before it settled neatly around a wooden post. The scent of leather and horse sweat mingled with the aroma of Ayasha's cooking, a fragrant blend that defined their home. Years spun by, marked by the changing seasons and Hope's steady growth. The ranch, once a refuge, had blossomed into a symbol. A symbol of two worlds intertwined, of love that transcended cultural divides, and of the enduring spirit that could bloom even in the harshest of landscapes. It was a beacon, a place where the echoes of the Old West resonated with a new song of understanding.